A dying billionaire begs his maid to have his child, desperate to save his family's legacy. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Alexander Grant, 62, once a feared and respected billionaire, now sat motionless in a private hospital room. Machines beeped beside him. The doctor's voice was steady, but the words cut like a knife. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. You have 6 months, maybe less. Alexander didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. He had everything: wealth, property, power, but no one to leave it to. His ex-wife had remarried. His sons hadn't spoken to him in years. The empire he built would be devoured by lawyers, board members, and distant relatives the moment he was gone. At home, in his massive penthouse, Alexander stared at a glass of untouched whiskey and a faded family portrait. The silence in the mansion pressed in around him. For once, he didn't feel powerful. He felt replaceable. Later that evening, a knock interrupted his thoughts. "Sir?" said a gentle voice. It was Sophia Rivers, his housemaid of over 10 years. Calm, loyal, always discreet. "I brought you some tea." He didn't answer right away, but as she turned to leave, he spoke. "They told me I'm dying, Sophia, 6 months." She froze, visibly shaken. "Sir, I'm so sorry." He looked her in the eye. "I need a favor. Something big." She hesitated. "Anything, sir. I want you to carry my child." The words hung in the air, impossible to absorb. Sophia's hands trembled. "Sir, I'm not the right person. I've never even been with anyone." "I know," he replied gently. "That's why I'm asking you. You're the only one I trust. You've worked here for a decade and never asked for anything. Never lied to me. Never leaked a word to the press." Sophia didn't respond. Her face was a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. "I'm not asking you to love me," Alexander said. "I just want a child, an heir. Someone I can trust to carry my name." She left without a word. That night she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of her small room, heart racing. Why her? Alexander had always been distant, powerful, untouchable, but now he was pleading. Not like a billionaire, but like a dying man who had nothing left but regret. She thought of everything he'd done for her over the years. Quiet kindnesses. Paying her mother's hospital bills. Helping her brother with tuition. Still, this was something else. For the next few days, Sophia avoided him. She cleaned alone. Ate in the back kitchen. Refused to enter his study. But no matter how she tried to avoid the man, she couldn't avoid the question. Was she really considering it? And if she said yes, on whose terms would it be? Sophia stood in front of the window in the servants' wing, staring down at the garden, where autumn leaves scattered in the wind. The city beyond seemed oblivious to her world unraveling. Every morning since that night, she had asked herself the same question. Was this real? Had Alexander Grant truly asked her, his housemaid, to bear his child? She hadn't told anyone. Who would believe her? Who could she even trust with something like that? The other maids whispered about Mr. Grant's health, about the hushed phone calls and sudden doctor visits, but none of them knew the truth. The man upstairs was dying, and he wanted a legacy. And somehow, he thought she was the answer. She hadn't given him a reply. She had run, but silence, she knew, was not the same as escape. 3 days passed. On the 4th, as she set a tray of breakfast outside his study, she heard his voice through the door. "Come in." She stepped inside. Alexander sat at his desk, staring at a folder, eyes bloodshot. He didn't look up. "I take it your silence means no," he said quietly. "I didn't say that," Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He raised his head slowly. She stood tall, despite the tremble in her hands. I just didn't know how to answer. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. I know this isn't fair, he said. I know it's selfish. But when you're staring down death, dignity dies first. She nodded slowly. I never imagined having children this way. Neither did I, he said with a humorless chuckle. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. If I do this, it has to be on my terms. He straightened slightly. No expectations, no romance, no pressure. Agreed. I want legal counsel. Protections. My own doctors. Of course. And the child will be mine just as much as yours. Absolutely. Sophia stood. Then I'll think about it. But I won't be rushed. Alexander gave a single nod. I'll wait. That night, she called her older sister Elise, who lived in a small town upstate. He asked me to carry his child, Sophia whispered over the phone. There was a long pause. Are you okay? Elise finally asked. I think so. I don't know, it's not a relationship. It's a contract. A legacy. Do you want to do it? I don't know. Elise didn't judge. She never had. She had raised 3 kids on her own after her husband died young. She understood what motherhood cost and what it gave back. I can't tell you what to do, Elise said gently, but don't do it out of guilt, or debt, or pity. Only do it if you can wake up every morning, look that child in the eyes, and know you chose this. Sophia cried after she hung up. The next day, Alexander summoned his lawyer. Not the usual man in suits who negotiated mergers, but a family lawyer, older, warmer. They drafted terms. Sophia's name would be on the birth certificate. All medical costs would be covered. Alexander would set up a trust for the child. She would retain full custodial rights, no media, no announcements, no manipulation. It was all there, in black and white. When she saw it, something inside her shifted. This wasn't fantasy. This was real. The night she signed the agreement, she stood in front of her mirror for an hour. She had always thought her first child would come after love, after marriage, after long talks under the stars and warm hands on her belly. But life rarely unfolded the way you plan it. Sometimes life hands you a broken billionaire on the edge of death, asking you to be his salvation. And sometimes, somehow, you say yes. The insemination was scheduled for the following week. Sophia chose a female doctor. She picked a discreet clinic in another city. She refused to let Alexander accompany her. He didn't protest. He simply waited. The process was clinical, cold, brief. But the weight of it, what it meant, hung with her like fog. Back at the mansion, Alexander didn't ask questions. He simply made sure her favorite teas were stocked, that she had new pillows, that the stairs were freshly polished. He didn't speak much, but he noticed everything. For the first time, Sophia saw the man beneath the title. Not Alexander Grant, the tycoon, but Alex, the man who drank his coffee too hot, who slept with a fan running, who hummed old jazz tunes under his breath when he thought no one was listening. The man was changing. And maybe so was she. For 3 nights, Sophia Rivers barely slept. By day, she performed her duties as usual, serving tea, managing household details, checking in with the nurses. But by night, she stood by her window, arms crossed, heart heavy, torn between what was right and what felt impossible. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. A child? With him? The thought alone made her heart race, not from romance, but from fear. Fear of losing herself, fear of judgment, fear of waking up one day and realizing she had handed over her values in the name of someone else's legacy. Her mother had always told her, "Don't let your kindness become your weakness." And yet, in her chest, something stirred. Compassion for a man facing death alone. A man once towering and untouchable, now asking her for something no business deal could buy. Alexander sat behind his desk, flipping through old family documents, wills, trust funds, property titles. His face looked paler, thinner. The door creaked. Sophia entered cautiously. He looked up, surprised. "I didn't expect you," he said. "I wasn't sure I'd come," she replied, her voice quiet but resolute. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Grant, I need to understand something before I answer." He set the papers aside. "Anything. Why me?" she asked. "Why not adopt or find someone else?" Alexander hesitated. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Because you're the only person in this house who has ever told me the truth. You've seen me at my worst, and you've stayed. You've never wanted anything from me." He paused. "I don't just need an heir, Sophia. I need someone I can trust to raise that child with strength, with values, with dignity. The kind I never had." Sophia's breath caught. For the first time, he wasn't just requesting. He was confessing. But Sophia wasn't ready to be swayed by words alone. She had learned the hard way. Powerful men often sound sincere when they're desperate. She needed time. A younger Sophia quietly watches from the hallway as Alexander yells at his son, his only child who dared to pursue music instead of business. "You're not my legacy." "You're a disgrace," Alexander had spat. That memory burned, and now that same man wanted a second chance, through her. She clenched her jaw, fingers curling at her side. "If I give him this, what does that make me? And if I don't, will I regret it for the rest of my life?" Sophia sat in the quiet of the empty chapel in the mansion's garden, an old place she rarely visited. The air smelled like dust and lilies. She whispered softly, "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but I know he's alone, and maybe, just maybe, I'm the only one who sees the human behind the empire." Tears welled in her eyes, not from love, but from burden. She stood up. Her mind wasn't clear, but her heart was steady. He opened it, expecting distance, but saw something else. She didn't say much, just looked him in the eye and said, "If I do this, it's on my terms." Alexander nodded, slowly. "I wouldn't want it any other way," she added firmly. "And this doesn't mean you've earned redemption. That's still up to you." She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no. But for the first time, they were speaking to each other not as master and maid, but as two human beings, each holding a piece of power the other didn't have. Sophia woke before dawn. The mansion was silent. Even the clock seemed to tick more gently in the early hour. She sat on the edge of her bed, hand resting on her flat stomach. No confirmation yet, but the signs were there. Exhaustion, subtle nausea, a strange sensitivity to smell. She didn't need a test. She knew. There was life growing inside her. She should have been afraid, but what she felt instead was focus, a strange, fierce clarity. The terms were signed, the procedure done, the child on its way. But something had shifted. This was no longer about Alexander's legacy. It was about hers. After breakfast, she walked into his study without knocking. He was reading a newspaper, half distracted, and looked up in surprise. "I'm pregnant," she said flatly. The newspaper dropped. For a moment, he just stared. Then his eyes, once calculating, always guarded, filled with something unfamiliar. Awe. "You're sure?" She nodded. He stood, unsure whether to move toward her or remain frozen in place. Sophia raised a hand slightly, halting him. "I need you to understand something," she said. "This child may have your name, but their future will not be built on your past." Alexander's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not raising a miniature version of you. I'm not grooming another empire builder. I'm raising a human being with a heart, with freedom, with kindness, He looked away. "You asked me to help you leave something behind," she continued. "But now I'm asking you to step back and let me build something ahead." That night, Sophia began to write. Not a journal, a plan. She mapped out expenses, schools, possible guardians, health contingencies. She emailed a private counselor to discuss future co-parenting options and therapy support for both herself and the child. She began searching properties out of state, quiet places, far from the weight of skyscrapers and press releases. If Alexander wanted a child to inherit his world, Sophia would make sure they had the strength to survive outside of it. This was no longer a favor. It was strategy. It was protection. A week later, a courier delivered documents to the mansion. Sophia had contacted her own lawyer. She had drafted a secondary agreement. It gave her final say over all medical decisions. It guaranteed the child would not be forced into the Grant public estate or business unless they chose it as an adult. It required that any remaining funds from the trust would pass to the child directly, not be held or invested by the Grant board. When Alexander read the papers, he didn't protest. He simply looked at her, something like respect settling into his expression. "You're making this real," he said. "I already did," she replied. He signed. Later that night, Alexander sat alone in the dark, staring at the fireplace. He thought about his father, cold, distant, impossible to please. He thought about Veronica, his ex-wife, how they'd built an image instead of a home. He thought about Jared and Eric, both brilliant, both broken by his expectations. And now Sophia, a woman with no title, no pedigree, no ambition for wealth, was holding the one thing he had never been able to protect: the future. He picked up the phone. He called Jared. It went straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. But he knew he would try again. Sophia, meanwhile, began planning something else. She contacted a small legal team in her sister's town. She began setting up an independent trust, one that didn't include the Grant name at all. She wanted options, because in her heart, she still didn't fully trust the world Alexander had built. Too many rooms had been filled with silence. Too many hands had been paid to stay loyal. Too many lives shaped by what looked good on paper. But this child, her child, they would not be another line on a press release. They would be loved, protected, free. Even if it meant walking away from everything. Autumn deepened. The wind came sharper now, rustling the trees that lined the Grant estate. Inside, the mansion had grown quieter, more introspective. Even the staff whispered less, as if something sacred had begun to unfold within those old stone walls. Sophia no longer moved like a servant. She walked with presence. She had stopped wearing the maid's uniform. At first, no one questioned it. Then no one dared. Alexander noticed, but he said nothing. There was a new rhythm between them, measured, cautious, but deeply human. They shared space now, not as employer and employee, but as two people orbiting the same fragile hope. Sophia didn't seek his approval, and Alexander, to his surprise, didn't resent her independence. If anything, he admired it. She still didn't sit beside him at meals, but she would sometimes speak first. Ask questions, share thoughts, and slowly that cracked something open in him that years of power never had. One evening, Sophia passed by his study and noticed the door ajar. She hesitated before knocking. "Come in," he said. He was looking through an old photo album. She stepped inside, cautious. "These were from the early days," he said. "Before the empire, before the ego." She glanced at the pictures, Alexander with his arm around a younger man, smiling. The man had the same eyes. "Eric?" she asked. He nodded. "He taught me how to play piano. Told me I was too rigid. Said music couldn't be conquered. It had to be felt." "Where is he now?" Alexander's shoulders sagged. "Somewhere in Paris. Or maybe Lisbon. We haven't spoken in years. You should reach out again. I don't deserve to. Maybe, but he deserves to choose for himself. That night, Sophia found herself thinking of Alexander, not as a man of wealth, but as a man haunted by absence. The son who left, the wife who never looked back, the empire he built, empty of warmth. And now this child, hers, his, theirs, was a second chance neither of them truly expected. One morning, while reorganizing the bookshelves in Alexander's study, Sophia found a locked drawer slightly ajar. Inside, folders, labeled meticulously, contracts, settlements. And then, a letter. Eric Grant, final agreement. She pulled it out. It was a legal document, a non-disclosure, a payout. The day Eric left, it hadn't been out of grief or rebellion. It had been bought. Sophia's stomach twisted. He hadn't just lost his son, he had silenced him. She waited until dinner. They sat across from each other in the smaller dining room. A fire crackled nearby. "I found something," she said. Alexander looked up. She placed the document on the table. His face turned pale. "I wasn't snooping," she said, "but I think I deserve to know the truth." He stared at the letter for a long time. Finally, he said, "He wanted to go public, about me, about how I pushed him. The pressure, the rejection. I offered him money to keep quiet. And he took it." Sophia was silent. "You think I'm a monster," he said. "I think you were scared," she replied. "And people who are scared do monstrous things." He nodded slowly. "You said you wanted redemption," she added. "Redemption doesn't come through me. It comes through truth, through facing what you've broken." The next morning, she found him at the piano. He was playing something soft. Hesitant, almost childlike. When he saw her, he stopped. "Would you read something for me?" he asked. She sat beside him. He handed her a letter. "To Eric, from Dad." Sophia read it. It was raw. Honest, apologetic. She handed it back. "You should send it." He nodded. "I will." That afternoon, Alexander left a voice message for his son. "Eric, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll read the letter. I've done many things wrong, but this time, I want to do something right." Sophia heard the message play. She didn't say anything, but for the first time, she felt the quiet beginning of something that had never existed between them before. Trust. Rain fell hard against the mansion windows that night, hammering the glass like it was demanding to be let in. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the air was still. Too still. Sophia stood in the nursery, her hands resting lightly on the back of the rocking chair. The soft green walls, the quiet mobile above the crib, the books on the shelf. All of it was real now. She was 5 months along. The child kicked stronger each day. Alexander had grown paler, thinner. The walks he once insisted on taking in the garden had shortened. His voice, once commanding, now cracked with fatigue. But he was still here, still trying. Still waiting for something he hadn't named aloud. Peace. That morning, an envelope had arrived. Thick, official. From his brother Marcus. Inside was a legal notice, a formal challenge to the inheritance. A motion to invalidate the trust. Sophia had read it first. Her hands trembled not from surprise, but from the cold, familiar shape of betrayal. Alexander's empire wasn't just coveted, it was threatened, from within. When she handed him the letter, he didn't react with anger. Only silence. "I knew he would come for it," Alexander said at last. "He was always waiting for the moment I was weak." Sophia's voice was steady. "Then don't give him that moment." She called her lawyer. She reviewed every clause of the agreement. She added new protections. Emergency power of attorney, public declarations, Media statements. She no longer waited for Alexander to act. She led. And for the first time, he followed without resistance. That night, she stood by the nursery window watching the rain. He entered quietly. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I'm clear." He stepped closer. His breathing was heavier now, but his eyes still held that quiet fire she had come to recognize. "I never knew how to protect anything without owning it," he said. "But you taught me there's another way." Sophia turned to face him fully. "If you want this child to be safe, truly safe, then you have to give up control. Not fight for it. Not manage it. Surrender it." He nodded. "I'll go public," he said. "Not just about the child, about Eric, about everything." Her eyes widened. "Are you sure?" His voice was calm. "If I die with silence, Marcus wins. But if I die with truth, my child wins." The press conference was called 2 days later. Reporters packed the hall. No one expected Alexander Grant to appear in person. They had heard he was dying, that he'd gone quiet. But he walked onto the stage, slowly, but upright. Sophia stood beside him. He faced the cameras. "I'm Alexander Grant," he said. "You've known me as a tycoon, a builder, a strategist. But none of that matters now." He paused. "I am dying, but I refuse to die dishonest." He told the world about his mistakes, about Eric, about pushing away the people he should have protected. And then he told them about the child, about Sophia. "She is not just the mother of my heir. She is the protector of everything I failed to hold. And I trust her more than I've ever trusted myself." The room fell silent. Sophia didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. That night, back at the estate, Alexander collapsed. Sophia rushed to his side. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Just tired." "No more speeches," she said, trying to keep her voice light. He chuckled weakly. "Deal." He was stabilized, but the doctors were clear. "He's running out of time," they said. "Days, maybe a week." Sophia nodded, her jaw clenched. She wouldn't let him go without one final promise being kept. Eric arrived the next morning. Sophia opened the front door to a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a simple jacket, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a guitar case. His face was tired, cautious, but familiar. They said nothing at first, just looked at each other. Then Sophia stepped aside. "He's waiting." Eric entered the house he once called home. The reunion was not dramatic. There were no tears, no raised voices, only a quiet moment in Alexander's bedroom, where a father and son sat in the same room for the first time in over a decade. Eric stood at the doorway. "You look worse than I expected," he said softly. Alexander chuckled weakly. "You sound just like your mother." That broke the tension. Eric sat beside the bed. "So you finally decided to tell the truth." "I had to," Alexander said. "For the child. For you." "For myself." Eric nodded. "You still owe me a lifetime, but I'll take a conversation." They talked for 2 hours. About everything, about nothing, about music, about mistakes, about what it means to be a man who changes too late. Sophia waited outside the room the entire time. When Eric finally stepped out, his eyes were red. "Thank you," he said to her, for giving him a reason to try again. The final week was quiet. Alexander stayed mostly in bed. Sophia read to him. Eric played music softly in the next room. The staff moved like gentle shadows, keeping the house running without words. One afternoon, Sophia brought him a letter. "I wrote something," she said. "For James, for the future." He took the envelope, hands shaking. "Can I read it to him myself?" he asked. "Of course." She placed it in the small wooden box beside his bed. when the time comes. That night, the three of them, Alexander, Sophia, and Eric, sat in the garden. The moon was full. The air was cool. Alexander looked at them both. "I thought legacy was about buildings," he said. "About titles, but I was wrong. It's about what you leave behind in people." Eric squeezed his shoulder gently. Sophia smiled. "Then you finally built something real." He closed his eyes, leaning back. "I can go now," he whispered. He passed the next morning, peacefully, in his sleep. Sophia was there, holding his hand. Eric stood at the window, silent. The funeral was private. No headlines, no scandal, just a small ceremony in the garden. A tree planted in his name. Sophia gave a eulogy. "He was not perfect," she said. "But he tried. And in the end, he chose truth over power. That choice changed everything." 3 months later, Sophia gave birth to a healthy baby boy, James Alexander Rivers. She held him in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Eric was there. So was Elise, and the nurse who had become a friend. They each took turns holding him. But it was Sophia who whispered the promise. "You are free, you are loved, and you will never carry a burden that isn't yours." In the years that followed, Sophia raised James with quiet strength. She moved to a quieter town, bought a small home, ran a community garden, taught music lessons on weekends. Eric visited often. He and James formed their own bond, one born not of obligation, but of choice. The Grant fortune remained untouched until James turned 18. And even then, it was Sophia who reminded him, "Money doesn't make you worthy. How you live does." When James turned 10, Sophia gave him the letter Alexander had written. He read it quietly, then folded it and held it to his chest. "Was he afraid?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but he faced it." "That's brave," James said. She nodded. "Yes, it is." In the end, Alexander Grant was remembered not for the towers he built, but for the truth he told before he died. Sophia Rivers, once a housemaid, became the guardian of a legacy that money could never buy. And James? He grew into a man who knew love, honesty, and the weight of choice. Because one dying man asked for a child, and one brave woman said yes. And so, Alexander Grant's story came to a close. Not in boardrooms or headlines, but in the quiet arms of truth, redemption, and a child born of unexpected grace. Sophia, once invisible, became the heart of a legacy. And James. He would grow up not in the shadow of power, but in the light of choice, honesty, and love. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can leave behind is not fortune, but change. What would you have done in Sophia's place? Do you believe Alexander truly redeemed himself before the end? And if you had the chance, would you forgive? Rate this story from 1 to 10. Share your favorite moment and tell us, should there be a sequel? If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories like this. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale that just might change your perspective. Thank you for watching. Until next time.